All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Anant. I'm a professor of economics at UW-Madison, where I hold the Mary Sue and Mike Shannon Distinguished Chair, and also the research director of the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy. Right? So at some level, you could begin by asking the question, what in the world is CROWE doing sponsoring an event like this? Maybe you're not asking that, but thinking it. So we had a great set of issues this semester, this particular year that we talked about, particularly viewpoints that are typically not openly subject to viewpoint diversity and ideas on campus. So we're doing what we can, which is Chancellor's one of Chancellor's biggest initiatives to promote viewpoint diversity on campus. Let me give you some pretext here. Gallup polls have recently found that only about 36% of Americans have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher ed. The number of those saying that they have very little confidence in higher ed grew from 22 to 32% this past year or so. Gallup asked them why, and the number one reason across the board was political agendas. Public support for UW within Wisconsin also lies at an all-time low. Marquette polls suggest that other state priorities have seemed to have overtaken support for UW's system. We rank kind of between Wisconsinites' responses, I don't know and I don't care. So one approach is to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to this decline in public confidence, asserting the superiority of the academy. My own view is it's important that we pay heed to the views of the public and look a little bit introspectively. I'm going to pick on Scientific American. So Scientific American, which has been in continuous publication since 1845, featured great minds such as Einstein and Oppenheimer. So I found it surprising that some of these articles in the magazine, kind of in the last few years or so, denounced like the clearly beneficial public health goals, such as reducing America's sky-high obesity rate as racist. It politicized science when it criticized Mr. Trump's support as president for a work requirement as a condition for Medicaid eligibility. And in contrast, the editorial said Ms. Harris's support supports the science and would improve health by expanding Medicaid coverage. Apparently, whether the welfare state increases welfare and health is not up for debate. On the matter of climate change, in 2021, Steve Koonin, who was Obama's undersecretary, published a book titled Unsettled. The book attracted many negative reviews, filled with ad hominem attacks, such as a short statement appearing in Scientific American and signed by 12 academics that instead of substantively rebutting Koonin's argument, calls him a crank who's only taken seriously by far-right disinformational peddlers hungry for anything they can use to score political points. Chancellor Daniel Diermeier at Vanderbilt said, and I quote, "We have to be extremely worried that standards of scholarly excellence are being undermined by political position taking." According to Fareed Zakaria, America's top universities should abandon their long misadventure into politics, retrain their gaze on their core strengths, and rebuild their reputations as centers of research and learning. So there are numerous issues where, in my view, the academy hasn't quite lived up to its expectations. Given that none of us has easy or simple access to the truth, our only pathway is, per our famous statement, to sift and winnow. Whatever our field of work, we must engage with a variety of rival assertions, claims, and viewpoints, looking for the truth. At its best, a university that embraces open expression, evidence-based engagement, and lively exchange of rival truths can stand as a model for a pluralistic democratic society and provide a training ground for its leaders and citizens. These challenges are distinct from one another, but are inextricably intertwined. Like viewpoint diversity, without a culture of civil dialogue, at best creates disconnected echo chambers. And at worst, it reinforces the polarization that troubles our current world. Likewise, a culture of civil dialogue without real viewpoint diversity means that we will be only exposed to voices with which we, in fact, by and large, agree. The disagreements we do encounter are likely to be respectful, but relatively insignificant when we miss opportunities to see what might be wrong. So with that super long preamble, I want to introduce our speaker, but I also wanted to give you some context and let you know why I invited controversial speakers on issues such as DEI, tariffs, the best way to organize and support UW-Madison, and now on climate change. One of the Chancellor's priorities is viewpoint diversity, and I applaud her for championing that cause, and I'm doing what little I can to further that. I want to make clear that I do not necessarily agree with or endorse all of the views of my speakers, but I also very much dislike shutting down and canceling voices. Okay, some logistics for this event. Steve is going to talk for about 35 minutes. There will be plenty of opportunities to ask questions. Tara, is the microphone right there? There's a microphone right there. Let me introduce Stephen. Stephen graduated from Cornell with a major in chemistry, received a master's in polymeric materials from Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute, and attended Wharton Graduate School. Initially, he worked in a family plant manufacturing business as a chemist and a general manager. For 30 years, he led a merger and acquisition firm specializing in chemical transactions and participated in the sale of about 200 companies. 20 years ago, he founded Capital Midwest Fund, a venture fund which focuses on technologies with advanced software for business-to-business applications. His book on global warming, Climate Change, What They Rarely Teach in College, was #1 in weather on Amazon. He has spoken at a number of universities, including Michigan, Michigan State, and Cornell, as well as high schools and business groups about climate change. Stephen lives in Milwaukee with his wife, Nancy. He has 2 children and 7 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Steve Einhorn.
I'm Steve Einhorn. I want to thank Professor Chaudhry for inviting me to come today. I've actually wanted to talk to you for 2 years. So I'm particularly grateful to the professor for allowing me now. I'm going to talk about the economics of climate change. I'm going to do it from the perspective of what should be economics of climate change. In order to do that, we have to talk about climate change. What actually is happening? 2 camps now, or in the past, there have been 2 camps. I'm hoping there's more agreement coming in the future, but there are basically 2 camps. You have the climate activists, sometimes called more aggressive terms. But the climate activists believe that we have an existential problem. This is settled science. There's a consensus. The consensus is that fossil fuels are causing climate change. Fossil fuels are causing global warming. Another camp, calling climate realists, sometimes they're called climate deniers. Their position is we study history. We look at history and see what's happened in the past. Based upon what's happened in the past, we predict the future. Now, I want to tell you, I want to share with you something I've learned. I've spoken several times. What I've learned is that sometimes when one hears an opinion, it's different than your opinion. People become upset, frustrated, angry, disappointed. Don't let this happen. All I'm doing is presenting ideas that I believe are true based upon information that I'm going to send you. It's just a way of looking at things. And there are other ways of looking at things. And so the important thing, as you know, it's your education. You're the ones who have to determine what you believe. And that's how it should be. And that's the purpose of an education. I have a few questions here. How many of you believe fossil fuels causing climate change, and this is an important issue? Raise your hand. Not surprising, you are the majority. Okay. Now, how many of you believe that the sea level is rising, has accelerated, and this is a problem? Good. Okay. So now I know where we stand. Let's see what happens. This is the basic argument for climate activists. Fossil fuels burn. What happens when they burn? Have more atmospheric carbon dioxide. And atmospheric carbon dioxide causes global warming. Global warming causes climate change. No, this is a summary. It's not complete. It's an overview of what the argument is. Let's see to what extent fossil fuels are actually causing global warming, causing climate change. Hurricanes. There have been no increase in hurricanes. Those are all those squiggly lines going up and down which show how many total hurricanes there were and major hurricanes. There's been no increase in 45 years. Blue line, carbon dioxide, goes up every year. From the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this is part of our US government. These are government statistics. An argument that the hurricanes, there may not be more hurricanes, but they're moving faster. And quite likely, based upon the studies, that there is a small increase in the North Atlantic and the hurricanes are moving a little bit faster. Usually are not told that in the Pacific, the hurricanes are going slower. Now the question is, climate change causing hurricanes in the North Atlantic speed up, while the hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean slow down. Also from the NOAA government. Tornadoes. This time it's the red line. You can see the red line going up. What happens with the tornadoes? These are major tornadoes. There's no increase. Talk about acres burned. Fewer acres burned according to another government group, National Intergovernmental Fire Center. And once again, carbon dioxide goes up and the acreage of fires go down. Now, we all know that there was a major group of fires in California in January, but it's hard to blame this on global warming because it was January. January is not a particularly warm month. So we know that there were problems. There were political problems in cleaning up the forests, utility problems, and some arson. Anyway, it's unlikely we can blame this fossil fuels. Now we get to the number of forest fires, also by the NIFC, the government agency, and you can see there's no increase number of forest fires. Humans cause 80% of all forest fires, according to the National Fire Service. This is Smokey the bear. He's been around before any of us have been born. Smokey tells us you cause forest fires. Know that 80% of forest fires are caused by humans. If it's an urban area, know that 97% caused by humans. Arson, carelessness, there's utilities, all sorts of reasons why this happens. But whatever the other 20% is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to work hard on this minimal amount. What we should be working on is the human responsibility. Fires, at least based upon statistics here. This is a chart. This is a chart from Willie Soon at Harvard. And the red line is CO2. You can see that CO2 increases every year. Right? You also can see the other, which is the actual Earth's temperatures. That's in blue. And that's going up overall a little bit, but it's also going down. You got up years, you got down years, you got up years and down years. There is a little bit of correlation, but there's not a lot of correlation on a yearly basis between carbon dioxide and Earth's temperature. Work indicates that what there is a direct important connection is with the sun. You can see that once again, now the sun this time is red. Earth temperatures are blue. It's not exact. The sun doesn't control everything here on Earth, but it's a major factor. And you can see from chart here that basically when the sun has fewer sunspots and it's a little cooler, temperatures go down, vice versa. People will say, well, 1 year or 2 years isn't enough. You really can't judge the effect of carbon dioxide. You can't do it in a couple of years. You need a longer period of time. Here are 32 years. These 32 years, this is between 1944 and 1976, the Earth's temperature actually decreased. And from the blue line, you can see, again, carbon dioxide goes up. So I'm not saying that there's no effect by fossil fuels. no effect by the increase in atmospheric amount of carbon dioxide, but it's not that significant because if it were, this chart would look different. Now let's go to 1998, 2015. It's important actually because 1998 was a very warm year. And one night, this is from 1998 to 2015, so that's 16 years. There. In 1998, the climate activists, two words, global warming, was no climate change. Get the climate change. Well, after about 10 years or so, when there was no increase in temperature, climate activists, some of them, were very upset. They need, because it's important. It's important to control fossil fuels, whatever else. But what you have to do, you have to find out how you can communicate better with the population. They went to a firm called Meslansky. It's a PR firm. And what they do is they specialize in wording, word proofing. Well, what did they do? Well, they did a study and they came up, we have the words for you. The words are climate change. Because the thing about global warming is you actually can measure it, at least measure it pretty accurately. What exactly is climate change? Much more vague concept. Now we have another word, extreme event. If climate change is vague, extreme event is even more vague. What do you mean we have more extreme events? Really very difficult thing to pin down and be specific. This is a little bit of a messy chart, but you understand most of it because blue line, once again, is carbon dioxide. And those red squiggly lines is the temperatures on Earth. And then you see these maroon spikes coming up. You notice that 1998 is very, very warm. In 2016 was very warm. That's why those spikes are coming up. Actually, 2023, 2024 also was warm, but this only goes up to 2023. What's happening here? Well, off the Pacific Ocean, this was in about 1800. Fishermen noticed something. What they noticed is that it had a hot year. Every several years, it was a very warm year. And they called that El Nino, E-L-N-I-N-O. Happened every several years, 1800. 1998 was an El Nino year. 2016 was an El Nino year. So you can see they were very warm. Very top were some volcanoes. Volcanoes tend to repel more of the sun's rays than not. And so they tend to make things a little bit cooler. Right? What this chart does show is that El Nino has a significant effect in warm years. Let's talk about extreme weather. Certainly, heat waves is very important in terms of extreme weather. When was the biggest heat waves? 1936, 90 years ago. The chart is from the EPA. Looking at it here probably will be your only chance because it's not in the internet anymore. It was removed from the internet. The question is why? You can guess why something like this might be removed from the internet by the EPA, but in any case, has been removed. I have a question for you. You know when the warmest day was in Wisconsin? Yes. Probably no one knows. It's not something you'd want to know, but it was 2036. In July 2036, Wisconsin was 114 degrees Fahrenheit, all-time high. Anyway, you might question whether we really have to worry about global warming here compared to what's happened in the past. Well, let's talk about deaths. Which is more important in terms of dying? More people die from cold died from heat. Where is it going? The chart shows very clearly. The blue is cold. More people die from cold around the world. We had a warmer Earth, fewer people would die from temperature changes, from temperature, extreme temperature. Let's go over to sea levels. Chart from New York City. What it's showing is that almost every year, the seas rise, and they increase in their level every year. They increase about the same amount. That's why this is a virtually straight line. There's some years it's more, some years it's less. But basically, this is a straight line. In New York City, waters outside New York City increase about 3 millimeters a year. That means 1 inch every 8 years. It's going up. This continues to go up, and it has since the beginning of this chart, claimed to be 1850. Going up really minimally. This is a chart of acceleration. That is there an increase in the increase of the levels of level? The answer really is no, we're very, very minimal. This goes from 1993 to 2023. This is from NOAA again. There's virtually no increase. Question is, this is just the United States. What about the world? Okay. Well, these are the 7 largest cities in the world that are on the ocean. Tokyo, New York, Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, Mumbai, Shanghai, Calcutta. That's it. These are the largest ones. And look, you see how the lines are all straight lines. Going up a little bit. They go as little as 1 millimeter a year to 4 millimeters a year. You saw in Los Angeles, I skipped Los Angeles, or in any case, Los Angeles is going up 1 millimeter a year. That's 1 foot every 300 years. So the chances of Los Angeles going into the ocean are truly minimal. I contacted someone from the UN IPCC, that's United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, specializes in this. He said, look, here's a chart. You got the 7 largest cities in the world. There's no acceleration. Where is their acceleration? And her answer was very clear. Next month. What happens? And this refers to the UN IPCC, who I consider to be alarmists. Their claim is that in 1900, seas were rising at 1.3 millimeters per year. That's increased to 2007 when they went to 2.6 millimeters and now to 3.7 millimeters. And it's going to increase another 3 times between now and 2050. Their projection. But it's not consistent with any of the charts that you've just seen, which are all from the US government. Well, Al Gore. Now, Al Gore was president, or was vice president, about when most of you were born. And he is well acknowledged to be one of the leading environmental leaders in our country. This is his projection. 2007, he projected that in the near term, say 15 years, waters were going to increase by 20 feet. Very likely increase by 20 feet. According to NASA, it actually increased 2 inches. So he may be a genius. He did write Inconvenient Truth, which is the #1 best-selling environmental book ever written. But in this case, he certainly erred. But why is there a disagreement? Why do we have different numbers? There are many reasons. One is that the activists often use computer models, incorporate uncertain values and even outright guesses. The realists forecast things based upon a continuation of past trends. I want to make something clear. That's this. But the professors here who work in climate, environmental work, are in almost all cases doing excellent work, and it's important. Not talking about their work, talking about is the UN IPCC. And they're doing is they take this fossil fuels and they claim that they're causing all sorts of problems, which really are not significant problems if they're problems at all. That's the reason, for example, that they get the wrong information in terms of the seas rising is because they add other factors besides actually measuring the seas rising. They measure as they include barometric pressure, include a factor for human activity for the future. They measure the ice that's come off of the glaciers. These are all factors that are included, and it's much more accurate, most likely, to just consider and measure the sea level rise. Polar bears. Well, how many of you believe that polar bears are headed toward extinction? Good, because they aren't. Well, they were going toward extinction. We're headed toward extinction before 1970 or 73. Of course, hunters were killing them, and you use the fur and they make beautiful rugs. That stopped in 1973 because the nations that had polar bears decided not to kill them. Then polar bears have increased significantly in number, as you can see from the chart on the left. No problem. So when you hear someone, some federation that says, send money to us and we'll save the polar bears, save your money. Because the polar bears don't need to be saved. You just leave them alone and they're going to grow and they're going to do just fine. Anyway, gets us to the coral reefs. There's many folks who believe that the coral reefs are dying. Here's a story of what happened in Palau. Palau is located in the Pacific Ocean. It's just a bit south of the equator. That's where Palau is. There's a number of islands there. It has some of the most beautiful coral reefs, as you can see. What happened there, these coral reefs were bleaching. They're all turning white and yellow. The reason was that there was a problem. And what was the problem? The problem was that you had humans there with suntan lotions. You were also taking refuse directly from land and putting it into the sea. The combinations were hurting the coral reefs. They stopped doing it. Once they stopped and a few years went by, this is what's happened. They're now doing just well. And then we have the Great Barrier Reef, right? That's the largest, 400 miles of coral reefs, the biggest in the world. During the past few years, the coral reefs are now stronger than they have been since measurements started in 1987. It's unlikely that the heat is destroying them or the pH decrease is destroying them. There certainly are some that thrive better under warmer temperatures, and there's some that thrive better in cooler temperatures, but by and large, coral reefs are doing just fine. Talk about extinction. What I'm trying to do is to cover major issues relating to climate change. Let's talk about extinction with animals. Al Gore wrote his book, Inconvenient Truth. These are 18 animals, like Al Gore said, these animals will very likely be extinct. Well, let's talk about a couple of them. First, here's the Hawaiian tree frog. Okay? How's it doing? Well, there are up to 20,000 of these per acre in Hawaii. And if Al Gore is really concerned about the tree frog, he should call 843 Pest Org, because that's the group that's trying to get rid of these excess, these Hawaiian tree frogs. Another one, the golden toad. Gore was closer on this one, because the golden toad is extinct, but his timing was very bad, because the golden toad became extinct 20 years before he wrote his book, and it died of a virus, nothing whatever to do with global warming. In fact, all of Gore's 16 are either thriving, doing well, some are being used as pets, some are still being killed. Basically, they're all still with us there. Here's a summary of what I've talked about. There are no more hurricanes, no more tornadoes, no real change. There's no increase in forest fires. CO2 is not a major cause of global warming. CO2 is not causing the sea levels to accelerate. polar bears are not becoming extinct, the coral reefs are not dying, animals are not going extinct. So this means altogether that the fossil fuels aren't causing any particular serious injury because these are perhaps even the majority of the issues relating to climate change. Also means that the sun isn't destroying the earth, and El Nino is not destroying the earth because they're not causing more hurricanes and more tornadoes either. Really, the climate's coming along pretty well. Now we get to the economics. I told you we finally get to the economics of climate change. Conclusion based upon the previous information I sent, I think, is that little reason, out of money, solve a problem that doesn't exist. Spending $2 trillion. Ask yourself, what happened to the $2 trillion we spent last year? What change has there been in any of these areas that I brought up? As far as climate anxiety, right now, 10% of young adults have climate anxiety. Concern about getting married, there's concern about having children. Concern is that the future climate may be just really terrible, may have just a disaster, it might be dangerous to pick someone. But if what I showed you here is true, then there's no reason for climate anxiety whatsoever. Then there's a question of mandates. We're forced to buy cars, appliances, or anything to buy. And get into it, but there's no reason to because there's no problem. Why should we change our habits of buying? And why should we be obligated to purchase products that we don't want? We're overly expensive. Finances. And of course, there's personal freedoms. Really want to give up personal freedoms or liberty for this, which is really not a problem. Should you be allowed to eat hamburgers? Or should that be prohibited because we're concerned about climate change? I want to talk about the Paris Agreement. You know, Trump just gated our interest in the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement has been important. What happens here is that the UN IPCC does the science. Based upon that science, they go to the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement has 200 members around the world who've signed it. They're trying to follow its mandates. What they're basically saying is if you take today's temperature, and you add 1 degree centigrade, we're going to have a disaster. We're going to have a catastrophe. That's clearly what they've been saying. There's a question of, okay, what about net zero? That is, what happens if we have an increase in carbon dioxide? Shouldn't we have no increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Isn't that what we really want? And that would be net zero. According to the Paris Agreement, everything will get worse if we don't succeed in doing what they advise us that we should be doing. Lifespans will decrease, poverty is going to increase, literacy is going to decrease, wealth is going to decrease. Let's see what actually happened. Now we're going back the last 100 years. We've had an increase in temperature during the past 100 years. Well, what happened? How did we do? Lifespan increased by 20 years. The increase in temperature didn't affect lifespan. All right. See about poverty. Well, poverty's decreased since 1905 to 20%. Literacy has increased from 20% to 80% last 100 years. Wealth has increased significantly. Since 1900, 90 times from the US government again. Okay, so let's look at what this means. Paris Agreement is telling us things that contradict history. History say, demand has increased, poverty has decreased, literacy has increased, wealth has increased. Based on historical science, Paris Agreement claims have very little or no validity. This is a chart. It's from Jan Lomberg, Danish. This is the Danish consensus. And they did a study, said, okay, let's look at the Paris Agreement. Let's look at what's really happening at the Paris Agreement. Let's do nothing happens. Let's do everything the Paris Agreement wants us to do. And let's do some of the things that the Paris Agreement wants. Sure. Basic difference is 1/10 of 1 degree. Can't measure that as a person. By the way, let me ask you a question. Has anyone here noticed temperature changing? While we're in there, which way has it changed? What? Here. The room. In the room. You notice the temperature changing in the room. No one knows. The temperature has changed. Changed as much as the Paris Agreement has told us will cause a disaster. I just want you to understand what we're talking about by 1 degree. It's what it is. I don't know whether they increased it or decreased it myself. I just asked them to change it by 1 degree and did. So I just wanted you to get a feeling of what the Paris Agreement is advising us as a terrible problem. The question is, how do you look at this increase? This is one way. And this is what you'll see in most books, most entries. From Berkeley Earth. This is what shows the Earth warming 1 degree centigrade in 140 years. Looks like it's going straight up. Now, if this continues going straight up, we got a real problem. Oh. There are other ways of looking at it. Here's another way. This is the same increase, is shown from a different perspective. Now you have to decide, what do you believe? You like this one, or you like this one? Of course. Talk about zero, net zero. Is it possible? Answer most certainly is it's not possible. We're not going to hit net zero. Virtually everyone, I believe this. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try it according to certain people, but it cannot be achieved. China is going to be adding about 1 coal facility every week next year. So, what we can expect. The other major, so to speak, is the Green New Deal. Let's talk about the Green New Deal because it's terrific. We'll save the earth and we'll have the Green New Deal. The current debt's about $37 trillion. There's a part of the Green New Deal that relates to the climate. There's a part that has nothing to do with the climate. Related to the climate is transportation, cars, planes, electric grid, housing more insulated. But 4 times that amount relate to everybody having jobs, care for everybody, completely, and food for everybody. Total it up, it gets $73 trillion. This cannot happen. What happens with $73 trillion of debt? Solvent. Our country is insolvent. We're bankrupt. We have hyperinflation. We have anarchy. That's what happens. It happened in Rome, in Zimbabwe, happened in Germany in the 1923s. It's happened in every country that has inflated its currency, end up with bankruptcy and anarchy. I want to go over why. Well, the question is, well, if it's, why do so many people believe fossil fuels causing harm and are going to destroy the earth? Certainly cause a lot of global warming, climate change. There are 5 reasons: census, bad predictions, language distortion, fear, intimidation, guilt, money. Let's take the first one. How many of you have heard that there's a 97% consensus climate change, very important, and fossil fuels are causing climate change? Where did this come from? From an article a number of years ago by John Cook. You actually look at those articles, only 1% said, quote, that climate change is important and caused by fossil fuels. 1%. As far as objections to it, 25 years ago, the Einhorn petition had 31,000 scientists who rejected 97% consensus. Currently, there are 2,000 who work with the Clinton group, including Nobel Prize winners, who say there is no climate emergency. So if you don't agree to anything I've said, at least let's agree that we don't have a climate consensus, because there is no climate consensus. There's been a large change in the last few years. Because a few years ago, a great majority of Americans believed fossil fuels were causing significant harm to the. But the most recent polls have indicated that less than half of all Americans believe that there's a problem. 55% of all Americans do not believe that climate change is any problem or a meaningful problem, according to the Pew poll taken a few months ago. The question is why? There are many reasons why. We spent $2 trillion in last year. Most people can't figure out exactly what happened to the climate as a result of it. But there's another reason. It's very significant because it's much more understandable. It has to do with the behavior of the leading climate activists. Who are they? Who are the influencers of climate? Real influencers are major people like Al Gore, who was President, Bill Gates. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world, and Barack Obama. Al Gore uses 30 times the carbon footprint of the average American. They say they can buy carbon credits, but that doesn't eliminate the effect of Bill Gates owns multiple planes. He owns multiple private planes. He has a very large mansion of 66,000 feet, and Barack Obama has 3 mansions, including one right on the Atlantic Ocean. And there are bad projections. What happens is if your assumptions are wrong, projections are wrong. So please read this. Have some silent reading. Just take a few moments and read this, because it just goes over a number of projections over the past 20 years or 30 years. What actually happened. Projected. These are major projections. And if you actually believe them, you have every right to be scared. Look at what they're saying. We'll lose most of our species, be underwater. Another problem has to do with the daily newspaper. If we have Hurricane Katrina, what happens with Hurricane Katrina? Well, it proved there's climate change. What doesn't? Hurricane Katrina is an example of weather. Weather is the state of the atmosphere in a particular place, time and place. Climate is the usual weather conditions over a period of years. Katrina is not climate. One event. In terms of hurricanes, we don't have any more hurricanes than we've had in the past. We have Greta Thunberg. Never underestimate Greta Thunberg. She really is important. She's spoken almost every major Congress around the world. She has 2 million followers, 20 years old, been doing this for a number of years. She's got very wealthy. This is her argument. This generates fear, intimidation, and guilt. Around the year 2030, we will set off an irreversible chain reaction beyond our control that will most likely lead to catastrophe. Our lives are in your hands. I dare you to continue to look away from global warming and come here saying that you are doing enough. Your generation is failing us. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. What type of argument is this? Not a rational argument. Nothing to do with science. Nothing to do with science. It's nothing to do with logic. This is the same argument that a 2-year-old has when they say, Mom, you don't give me ice cream right now, I'm never going to talk to you. Exactly the same. Very effective. It's a problem. Occasionally, there's a manipulation of data which can confuse us. Chart on the right, you see two scales. One goes from 0 to 250, the other goes from 0 to 50. It looks like it's pretty close between the number of deaths, cold, and heat. If you do the scales properly, get what's on the left. You can see there are many more people who die from cold, from heat. Climate anxiety. Well, if you think that the Earth is going to increase its temperatures 3 times faster than it has been, you can have climate anxiety, and that's what this shows. There are 100 experiments or claims, projections. These are projections by UN IPCC scientists, what the Earth is going to have in terms of temperature increase over the years. And the average was 3 times higher. Red line, average of the projections, and the blue line, green, shows what actually happened in terms of temperature. What happens when your assumptions are just wrong? Because if your assumptions are wrong, you end up with the wrong conclusions. You have a poor projection. I want to talk about money. Spent $2 trillion last year. As far as money becomes, I want to talk about the universities. There's virtually been no way for the past 4 years for anyone who says almost anything I've said, get a penny from the government for a research grant. Well, virtually every penny has gone to activists to verify that they have to have as a basis that there is an important problem with climate change, and fossil fuels are a major aspect to this. That's changed because Trump has now become president, and so there'll be less money for this. But that's where virtually all monies from the federal government have gone to the universities. And now we talk about electric vehicles. We've all been told that we save a lot of energy for electric vehicles. It requires, for a medium-sized electric vehicle, you need 500,000 pounds mined earth. That's a lot of energy. The question is, when do you get it back? When do you get back this energy? It takes 8 years to overcome the costs of building an electric car. The average electric car is only 4 years old here in the United States, which means we haven't saved an ounce of energy on electric cars since we started this several years ago. And then the question is, well, who gets the money? We spent $500 billion last year on electric cars. They go to tax credits. They go to tax credits to who buys electric cars. So if you take an average Tesla, it costs $50,000. Poor people buy Teslas, $50,000. Now, this money is going to make rich people richer. It really makes very little sense altogether. You believe that there's not much of a problem with climate change, and you want to actually control the transfer of payments in a way that makes more sense. About wind farms. Oh, turbines use an incredible amount. Out of time. I'll go fast. I'm almost through, guys. Thanks for your patience here. Okay. I'll skip over to final thoughts. These are what wind turbines look like when they're waste. This is what the animals look like after they're killed. Skip fossil fuel benefits. $22 trillion a year. It's really based upon very questionable scientific assumptions about problems. Those problems don't exist. You have electric vehicles and renewable energy. Save very little energy. They have environmental and disposal problems. They have restrictions on our private liberty to buy products we want and behave and how the freedoms that we really deserve as Americans or want to have as Americans. Further final thoughts. There's no global warming problem, climate change problem, no more extreme events than in the past. What we should do is concentrate on the realization of worthy goals and happiness, because we're blessed with a wonderful climate. Okay.
I'll start off. So some of the graphs that you showed, I mean, and the inferences that you drew from those graphs were essentially either a correlation or lack thereof, and then leading to a policy prediction, which, I think most folks here would say is a little far-fetched, wouldn't you think? So at best, you could make the claim it doesn't pass the smell test. But ideally, you'd want models, you'd want to be in a position where you have shocks, you have exogenous variation, you have model uncertainty, and then make inferences based on that. Sorry, I didn't realize there were so many students behind me. I would have just shut up, let them ask questions.
Well,
Quick response, and then maybe I'll pass it on.
when you speak, please identify yourself too. I'd appreciate that. None of this information is my information. They're all coming from either the government, and the government has most of these. And these are government. This is government information. So the conclusions, not my conclusions in a sense. The conclusions based upon the information that I presented. You look at a straight line is a straight line. Okay. Onward.
We're speaking today.
What's your name?
I'm Eliana. In your book and in this talk, you frequently mentioned that the Earth's temperature has increased by 1 degree Celsius in the past 140 years. However, other opinions state that the rate of change of the temperature is what is most concerning, since it is much more rapid compared to the rest of human history. What is your reaction to that concern, and do you foresee any consequences in the long term with this continued rate of change in the Earth's temperature?
The rate of change altogether, as you pointed out, I think we agree, has been one degree. Some people say it's 1.5 degrees because it depends upon which year you're actually starting with. So there is an increase. Now, most of that increase, and we're in a warming period. 18,000 years ago, where we're sitting, we were under 100 feet of ice. So there's nothing new about we're in a global warming period. That's what's happening. And it may grow faster in the future, it may not. But one thing is we can't control it. That was what Beyond Bloomberg said. We should do everything they want, that the Paris Agreement recommends. We'll change it by 0.1 degree. Well, it really doesn't matter. Hey, sirrah, whatever happens, it's going to happen. And so I don't think we should be concerned about the future because there's no indication that the Earth is going to increase very rapidly. And if it does, there's not much we can do about it. Wait, that's my answer.
So I want to thank you again for speaking with us, and most importantly and you often bring up how the 1930s is on record to be one of the warmest decades, and kind of using that to refute how times have warmed in the past recent years, and how we can see this as evidence of warm years in the past. But there is data and evidence that suggests that this is significantly tied to the Dust Bowl, and that large amounts of the particulate matter of the dust that entered into the atmosphere above North America and Europe contributed to these warmer temperatures, as per a study published in Scientific Reports, which was funded by the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation. And as we know, the Dust Bowl was caused due to farming techniques in the plains that were not conducive to the environment, in combination with a severe drought at that time. So don't the effects of the Dust Bowl on the climate, which you use a lot in your data, thus show that there are anthropogenic causes that do contribute to changes in climate?
A very good point. I believe it's a very small pump, maybe 1 or 2 pages about the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. But you're right. there were factors there that made it special, which is why there's such a huge increase during that period of time. On the other hand, there's very little evidence that additional carbon dioxide is increasing, is causing the basic increase in temperatures. I showed you a chart that showed that sun has much more to do with carbon dioxide in terms of whether we have a warmer year or a colder year. Well, I'm agreeing with you that there were major factors which you pointed out, which made the 1930s a dust bowl. It was very bad. We haven't had that since, but it's not the carbon dioxide or the fossil fuels which are controlling what's happening now.
So my name is Abigail, echoing what they said. Thank you for coming and speaking with us today. And in your book, I kind of read in your sea level section about how you think that there's been like a lot of false narratives and people over projecting like how much they think sea levels are rising and the acceleration rate and whatnot. And I guess when I was thinking about like the economic realities, I was looking into how in places like Florida and Louisiana, like there are people that aren't getting homeowners policies, and a lot of insurance companies are unwilling to insure people in these areas because of like the flood risk and the fact that they're afraid of insuring properties out there. And there are also places like in coastal properties like across our nation that are like decreasing in value because of sea levels rising around them. And I was wondering how you respond to those economic realities that we're seeing.
Another very good point that we do have a lot of problems by the sea with hurricanes and other events which are causing major problems. And so that's really, it's very legitimate. The issue here, first, you actually do this on a historical, non-inflationary basis. We have about the same damage as we had 60 years ago. One major exception. There are many more buildings that are just directly on the sea now. That's for almost all along the shore. Look at Obama's place. They're all along the shore. And so we have many more, you got many more buildings right adjacent to the ocean. You're going to have problems when there's hurricanes. And right, it is very difficult, especially on, like, for example, the west coast of Naples, where they've had 2 terrible hurricanes. Friends there, and it happens one more time, they're out. Thanks for the question.
Hi, my name is Viva, and thank you again for coming to speak. In your book, you're a staunch opponent against renewable energy, and you claim that with negligible impacts of increasing CO2 levels, there's no reason to not continue using fossil fuels and using coal and natural gas. And I guess my question comes to, with studies showing that the proven oil reserves we have on Earth are going to only last us for 50 more years, and even considering energy efficiency and that reducing the amount of natural gas and coal we use, do you still not see a need to diversify our energy portfolio and invest more in renewable energy to continue our consumption over the future?
So glad you brought that up. Because you're right. Have not enough fossil fuels for the future. Depending upon who you read, we have 100 to 200 years. That's about it. So what's necessary here is to cut down the use of fossil fuels. The question is how. Here's an example of technology. This is liquid cooling for computers. Computers are going to be one of the major users. We have artificial intelligence now, and we're going to have umpteen billion megawatts of energy. But if we can save 50% of the energy by improved technology, which we can, there's tankless water heaters, this is liquid cooled solutions for computers. I hope that they'll some here perhaps. If we do that, we can save. So I think that's the way. Now, as far as renewable energy, it's really questionable if you look at this objectively, whether any of these, whether solar panels and balance are better for us, or turbines are better for us, or electric vehicles are better. And I think the position that I would hope we would all take is people want solar panels and they want to pay for it, fine, but we shouldn't be obligated to pay for their solar panels. And the same thing for the other items that I just mentioned here. It'd be voluntary. There are environmental problems that really have to be addressed, like the killing of 1 million birds and bats a year. Thank you.
Jeff Stoyer, retired water engineer, just a citizen who's taken points. You mentioned about like a temperature change of, I think they're really shooting for 1.5 degrees Celsius. And there are certain things that happen rapidly with the change, if you want to call it a tipping point. Or, for example, water is frozen at 30 or 31 degrees, 32, 33, it changes rapidly. So there are certain things on Earth, I believe, and the ocean occurrence being one of them. I think there was a reviewed paper recently. So there are certain things that happen rapidly, and they're discussed in the reviewed literature. I don't have it off the top of my head. So I have a kind of a follow-up on that, but I can see you looking, you want to address that.
Well, let me address that first because I won't remember the second one over.
Sure.
But you're right. If you go to most all the literature, you're going to say the most we can absorb is 1.5 degrees centigrade. It's not 1 degree, 1.5 degrees. That is from 1840. So from 1840 to the future, you got 1.5 degrees. Now, if it goes above 1.5 degrees, say to 2 degrees, that's when the disaster hits. And so the Paris Agreement is very clear. We have to hold it to 1.5 degrees centigrade. There have been recent papers written over the past few weeks which say we're just about at 1.5 degrees right now. If you go back to the 60s or something, whatever. Well, that's a factor. The other part is, it is true that ice can melt and become water, but as you know, ice uses even less ice uses more volume water. So it's not going to, and also a lot of the ice is underwater, but that's a whole nother subject and I don't want to interrupt things here. Go ahead.
So, and the other is that you can, carbon dioxide is an insulator. Bottle carbon dioxide and put a thermistor, heat them up. The CO2 will heat up rapidly and will stay high. So, the fact that we are object of that have models that you showed from, there are reviewed models now that take into account the sun, the changing energy of the sun. And those models are, and these are in reviewed papers, the models that predict the temperature change. And these are not statistical, they're deterministic models where they're doing the physics. Data, the observed data are within their predictive trends. So, and I can pass. So the models that are the predictive models, observed data are within their error bands, and they have accounted for the change in sun radiation. So they factor that out. So they're essentially looking at CO2.
There are graphs to that extent. Let me point out a few things that I didn't mention. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increases temperatures logarithmically. Means that for every additional molecule, carbon dioxide, it has less of an effect in terms of heat. And the general studies that I've read have been that we already have about 70 to 80% of the total heat carbon dioxide can generate in the atmosphere. So it's unlikely, assuming that it's true, that the carbon dioxide increases, an increase in molecules actually produces a lower change in temperature. And we have very little to worry about for that. I'd be happy to look at your paper.
Steve is going to stay around. There's going to be a reception. Is it a natural bar? Okay, thanks. We always have a natural bar. Doesn't induce people to stay back. There's no alcohol. It's just nachos. But I want to thank Steve. Please join me in thanking Steve for a talk. Pretty good.
Thanks, guys. Great. What? Now look, I wrote a book, as you could see, and there are copies here if you want it. I'll go over there if you want me to sign it. I'll sign it, but it has 900 footnotes. Almost everything I've said today, if you don't agree with it, it's fine. And you can look it up in the footnotes and see where it came from. But as I said, most of it came from the government. So if you don't like it, you know who to call. Guys.